Um, there's an astounding thing going on right now with the Stanley Cup Final and throughout these playoffs. Um, in the case of the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're a small team. They are a small, fast team. Chris Letang plays much bigger than he is. He's 6 foot tall. And Connor Sheary's only 5'8". I just looked that up. I'm like, wow, 5'8". And what he's doing right now on a line with Sidney Crosby, it's crazy. Now, I haven't been on doing videos for the last few days because I've been getting the crap kicked out of me by a flu. And I don't know where you pick up a flu late in May. I didn't get it from my kid. Hopefully he didn't get it from me. But anyways, I have it. I'm fighting my way through it. I'm in the stage now where everything just feels gross. So hopefully that means things are getting better. But there's an ongoing debate about what Jim Benning's doing. And I've been looking at the Canucks forums and going over comments on my channel as well. And the question seems to be one of retool or rebuild. And I've seen people penciling in Stamkos to their roster for the Canucks next year. That's cute. I saw somebody say if they buy out Higgins, Zabiza, Burrows, there was another one, Dorset, I think, then they can afford all these guys. And it's like, they do 4 buyouts? A, I don't know. I think there's a limit on buyouts you can do. And B, you still have to pay a cap penalty. The free buyouts only happened after the lockout ended. They said, all right, we've made a deal with the salary cap here. We'll let your teams dig their way out of the shit you started, and we'll give you amnesty this year and next year, but that's it. There's no amnesty anymore. So even if you get rid of $10 million off the cap, unless it's traded and you don't have to retain any of it, and in Burrow's case, you're going to have to retain some of it. Nobody's taking that $4.5 million Burrow's hit. It's just crazy to think that Stamkos is going to Vancouver, and I had a feeling that people would start penciling him in. Okposo as well. It's like, oh, we could get Okposo. It's like, okay, here's the problem. The Canucks right now are 28th overall in the league. And based on the second half of the season, honestly, they should have finished last overall. If you look at the second half of the season, they were abysmal. Just awful. And they couldn't score. They couldn't stop anybody. Their goaltending was average. And there really wasn't anything to cheer about in Vancouver. If if we're to believe there's a retool coming, I don't know how that's going to work. Because too many pieces of this team are already worn out. And I mean like Burrows, Higgins, the Sedins. These guys are done as premier top line players. I think the Sedins can still play second line players, but I think the first line and a lot of power play, penalty kill, Tortorella exposed that they're getting older and they need to kind of be a little sheltered in what they do. And I'm a fan of the Sedins. I truly am. I think the world of them. I think the Sedins are great ambassadors for Vancouver, and I think they've done a great job. And I've never once shit-talked them after the Canucks get eliminated from the playoffs because without them, the Canucks likely don't get to the playoffs. And they've never had any real support. This is why when people said, oh, well, Kessler would have put up better totals in Vancouver if he'd had better wingers. Well, the Sedins have had each other, but anybody who's on that third spot on the line, usually their totals go up because of the Sedins. So my point was, if Kessler was an unselfish player, it wouldn't matter who his wingers were. He'd find a way to get them. Look at Sheary with Crosby. Crosby just knows where to find him. Sheary knows where to stand, or where to stand in front of the net. And I look at Brian Russ. Brian Russ is 5'11", and it's speed. It's the sheer speed of the Penguins. The barrage they throw at you. And the Canucks don't really have that. They don't. There's no real speed component to their game. It's a cycle game. I don't think the coach Willie Desjardins is helping anymore with that. I think that in terms of which, how do I put this? As a fan of the team, my favorite team to watch in the history of the Canucks is still the 91-92 Canucks. That first year they started winning, and they were fast and they were amazing, and they had a lot of good skaters on that team, and they had a good mix of tough guys and skill guys. And it sure seems like we're picking up tough guys and not skill guys right now, which is okay if you're doing a rebuild. But if you're doing a rebuild, then you're not trading away prospects or 19-year-olds. One thing I've noticed on the Canucks forum today is people talking about, well, McCann's attitude. And then people have answered that correctly so, like Tyler Seguin. I remember Joe Thornton as a kid being derided a little bit for his attitude in Boston. In his first year, his numbers were terrible. Just awful. He was invisible quite a bit. Actually, 2 years into his career, he looked almost like a bust. There was some debate about whether or not he'd ever reach those lofty heights, and now he's scored over 1,300 points in the NHL, and he could win a Stanley Cup as early as next week. So, in terms of sorry, it's the flu. I haven't eaten anything since early Sunday, so my brain's not in the best shape right now. And I've drank very little. I'm trying, but one can of this yesterday. I opened this yesterday, and I've drank maybe down to here, and I've had 3/4 of a can of Diet Coke to try to deal with the headache, which I think might be caffeine related because I haven't had caffeine in 4 days, and that definitely seems to have helped. So screw you, caffeine, for making it worse. But in terms of rebuild or retool, I honestly think the best thing the Canucks could do is just completely strip things down and go for rebuild. And by doing so, you don't spend to the cap. You're honest with your fans and you say, look, we're probably not going to contend for a couple of years. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you guys a deal on tickets. We're going to give you a 25% discount right off the top. And you could do that because you're paying the players less. Fans are excited because the tickets cost less. And people like myself who can't afford a game right now might look at the tickets then and go, hey, that's not bad. I can go. And then for fans who are up in the nosebleeds, because they can't afford the tickets in the lower bowl, maybe they look and go, hey, no, lower bowl, cool. I can afford that now. You're buying PR. And what Benning has to do right now is buy PR. And the Goodbranson move is simply PR. There's been a lot of talk about, Goodbranson's future captain of the Panthers. Nope. If he was seen as a future captain of the Panthers, he'd still be with Florida. They would have moved somebody else out. It's Cody Hodgson all over again. If you view a player as much of a linchpin to your franchise as you look at him as being the future leader of your team, then you keep him. But in reality, the future leader of Florida is Ekblad. And Ekblad is something the Canucks have never had. He is a premier, top 1 or 2 defenseman who can play 30 minutes a game, absolute beast at both ends of the ice, mature beyond his years. The only way you can find those players is in the draft. And according to this year's draft, Ulivi is probably the best of the bunch on the blue line. And what was the funniest deal I saw somebody propose was, do you think the Oilers would give us number 4 overall if we offered them, I think it was Hansen, Zabiza, next year's second, and there was some other spare piece, And I was thinking, who in their right mind? And then somebody else was like, well, we'll trade Hansen for a late first-round pick. And I'm thinking, who? Why? Why is a team going to give up a first-round pick for Hansen? I don't care where it is in the first round. The over-evaluation of Canucks players continues. And I don't feel like I do that. Even Horvat, who's my favorite player in the league, he's not a top center right now by any stretch. But he could be. And I think he'll become one. I think there's every reason to believe he will be one. Virtanen, I'm not as sold on as other people. The potential, sure, but I don't know what the ceiling is for Jake Virtanen. I don't know if I'm as trusting that Virtanen's ceiling is as a top 6 winger, or potentially a top 3, if he's going to be on the first line. But we'll see. At least I hope we're holding on to Virtanen. If Virtanen and Horvat leave town, I'm just kidding. That's not going to happen. That was another one of the comments, like, well, they didn't trade Horvat. I know they're not going to trade Horvat because Benning has to sell his product. So you see, it almost seems to me like maybe Benning and Linden behind the scenes are saying, look, this team's just not got it. We need to do a rebuild, but we can't tell the fans we're going to do a rebuild because we remember what happened in 1999. And for people who are too young to remember, in 1999, when the Canucks were down in the dregs of the NHL, where they are again, fans stopped showing up, and there was real talk of moving the team to Seattle. And it was real talk that the Canucks team would be sold and moved to Seattle. And yeah, that seems absolutely unthinkable now. Absolutely unthinkable. But Vancouver fans are very fickle. And if the Canucks win 5 of their first 20 this year, you're going to have a lot of empty seats in Rogers. Because that's the problem with the rebuild. I don't think that fans in Canada, most Canadian markets, have the patience for a full rebuild. Toronto does, because they haven't had any success in quite a while. So I think Toronto's willing to sit and wait it out. Calgary was a few years ago, because they realized that Kiprasov was getting older and Iginla was gone. But their rebuild happened pretty quick. And Ottawa's been through a couple. I don't think their fan base would be shaken by another if that takes place. Montreal, Habs fans are very fickle too. And man, they turn on their players quickly. I remember when Halak got traded out and Carey Price had a bad preseason game. And the fans booed him before the next game. And it's like, it's preseason, guys. And that's how Montreal is. So they don't have the patience for it either. Winnipeg doesn't have a choice. Because their cap hits are always going to be low. Let's be honest, the Winnipeg Jets are never really going to be able to build up to be a top 5 team in the NHL. They're always going to be an underdog. They're always going to be just outside contendership at the best. And I honestly think of all the teams in Canada, I fear Winnipeg could get moved. The low Canadian dollar, the fact that their stands hold, I think, 2,000 less people than any other stands in the NHL. And I remember Don Cherry saying, oh, it's just the nosebleeds, who cares? Well, those add up. Let's just say that the nosebleeds are 2,000 times $10. So $20,000 times 40 games. It's $800,000. Now, factor in, they're not $10. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And it leaves Winnipeg fans probably having to pay a premium price for a team that can't pay a premium for its players. That's why Ladd got moved. This isn't the cap. This is Winnipeg's cap. So that's the sad truth for Winnipeg. And I hate to say it or think it, because Winnipeg fought so hard to get the NHL back there for so long. And they were so proud to get the team back. But, that Canadian dollar is sitting below 80 cents. And their stands only holding 15,000 people. It's going to add up. And it's going to mean that your team is going to always be stripping it down because they have to make a profit. That's the other thing I've always found funny too, is when fans are like, "Oh, this, this, and this, and this," and it's like, okay, so you think they should make all these moves? Are you the owner? No. Isn't an owner at his heart there to make a profit? Aquilini, for instance, in Vancouver, there's always been some criticism about him spending to the cap and trying to do patch fixes to get the Canucks back to the playoffs. Well, yeah, because every gate for the playoffs gets him millions of dollars. So if he can get 4 playoff gates, if they get out of the first round, even if they're on the road, like if they're not the home team, they get 3 gates in the first round, and they get a guaranteed 2 gates in the second round. You got 5 playoff gates. That's some good money. And that can be the difference between losing money and making money. So yeah, I don't blame Aquilini for trying to stay in the hunt. And when it comes down to it, Jim Benning's job's going to be on the line if he says, well, we're doing a full rebuild. Aquilini will call him in an office and say, no, we're not. You got to fix this. Fix it now. Because if anything, sports owners are demanding. Which is why I'm surprised that the Bruins continue to flounder and Jeremy Jacobs hasn't said anything yet. Apparently the latest with them was Koklachev going to the KHL. Now, I'll say it this way. I don't think Alexander Koklachev was ever going to be a mainstay in the NHL, and I think this is why. He's not a bottom 6 player, and he doesn't have enough talent to be a top 6. I understand why Claude Julien didn't keep him. I understand why Julien said, look, just send him down to the minors. I have nowhere here for him. Totally understand it. Bruins fans are pretty pissed off right now, though. Like, on the Boston sites, I'm looking at that's that Claude Julien. He just doesn't want to play young players. Torrey Krug? Tuukka Rask? No, he's played young players when they're good. Torrey Krug's 5'9". But I don't think Koklachev was that good. And yeah, his stats in the American League were okay. 40 points a season. It's okay. Translates to what, 20, 30 in the NHL level? Now, if that's top 6 forward, that's a problem. There was always rumors that Jim Benning was going after Koklachev. And I was always afraid of that. I was like, oh, please don't do that. Please don't do that. But when when the Bruins turned to Ryan Spooner and they didn't bother with Koklachev this year, I totally understood it. Spooner is a dynamic forward who can play any part of the lineup that you ask him to. And he has various aspects to his game that Koklachev just didn't bring. And in 9 NHL games, Koklachev was a -4. No points. Like, it's just, and you can say, oh, well, if he's getting 4th line minutes, how's that going to help him? Well, if a guy's really talented and really driven, then when he gets those 4th line minutes, he is going to excel. He's going to throw his body around and hit people, or he's going to get to the net or something. He has to show a drive to pull himself from that 4th line spot up to a 3rd or 2nd line spot. And when he doesn't, and he sulks, that shows kind of poor character. And I have a feeling that's probably what Julien was looking at. I think, too, I remember Alain Vigneault in Vancouver was always criticized for not playing the rookies. Turns out none of them were very good. The Canucks prospect system was pretty bereft. And the guys that he wasn't playing, they weren't playing because they weren't NHLers. I think that's what's been happening with Julien, too. And it'll really come to a head this year if DeBrusk doesn't play. I think DeBrusk is ready. Based on what I saw at the Memorial Cup. I think he should at least be given a 9-game audition. And, we'll see where it goes from there. But I'm very... stupid flu. I'm always entertained by this time of year because everybody becomes a GM. Everybody's an armchair GM this time of year. But I look at the 2 teams in the final. and they're fast. They're deep. They're not really fighters. I mean, Brent Burns is 6'5", and he's a beast. But Brent Burns also scores 65 points a year. So Burns isn't where he is because he's 6'5". He's where he is because he is simply one of the best defensemen in the league. So, and he's always been good. It's just now with DeBoer, he's become great. There's something that this coaching of Burns has helped. I mean, clearly DeBoer has had a very positive influence on San Jose, and I was skeptical at the beginning, very skeptical, but he's genuinely had a very positive impact on the team, and I guess we'll see. But you know, I look at those teams. I look at Pittsburgh and San Jose, and they've got some cheap pieces, some guys in entry-level contracts. They got some fast guys, and other fast guys, and their third and fourth lines are very talented, and their blue lines are very talented, 1 through 6. And in goal, they're both relying on young guys. Martin Jones was kind of buried in LA behind Jonathan Quick. He was never going to be the starter there, so he goes to San Jose and outplays Jonathan Quick in the first round. And in Pittsburgh, Matt Murray's taken over from Marc-Andre Fleury. So there's something to be said for having as many draft picks as possible and for having young, fast, talented players. Because of the teams that have been eliminated in the playoffs, in a lot of cases, it's been because they're not as fast as the team that beat them. It's these stretch passes. It's these stretch passes that I see teams doing, and Pittsburgh and San Jose are the best at them. And it's the way to get around the trap, and I've been saying it the whole playoffs. These stretch passes are crazy. It's what the NHL envisioned when they took out the red line, and it is a thing of beauty to watch. I mean, when they miss, it's an icing call. But when they hit, oh boy, you might be looking at a breakaway and a goal. But when Pittsburgh has guys on cheap contracts like Connor Sheary, who nobody knew who he was before the playoffs, Brian Rust, same thing, and they're able to slot them in and make them better, that says a lot for Mike Sullivan. And when San Jose is able to remold guys and take a guy like Donskoy and shape him into a top bottom 6 forward, it's intimidating. And then you got a guy like Tierney down there on the third line who is pretty damn talented too. There's a lot of talent in San Jose. It is hard to call who's going to be in the playoffs from year to year. But I would think that both San Jose and Pittsburgh will be buoyed by the Stanley Cup final, no matter who wins it. And they're both going to have pretty solid years next year. And whoever doesn't win, I think will have the better year next year. Because if San Jose loses this one, I think next year they come back and they roar through. They finish first in the division. And from there, I would be surprised if I'm not picking them to win the Cup. So that's just my general musings. Now, in terms of tonight's game, San Jose will win it because this is going to be one of those series that goes to 7. If Pittsburgh wins it, it could be over in 5. But I think San Jose is going to win it. I think it's going to be a tight, tough series. And if Brian Rust can't play, that could cost Pittsburgh, but they've already shown they can get Brian Rust from kind of forgotten man to one of their main stars. They can clearly do it with somebody else. There's no reason to think they can't. So one of the scratches would come in, and who knows? Maybe one of those scratches can just be the guy. Maybe Kunitz can get lit up for one last series. I mean, Kunitz is pretty tired, and his age is showing a bit, but you never know. You just have to get hot for a few games. And Kunitz can do that. Anyways, that's it from me.